This program is brought to you by the Kentucky Small Business Development Center in Louisville. We provide the professional expertise, tools, and resources to help you succeed. To connect with a business coach, call 502 625 0123 or email sbdcinfo@uky.edu.
Hi, welcome everybody for another edition of Toolkit Tuesday. We're glad that you're here today. If it's your first time, welcome. If it's your 100th time joining us, glad to see you back. A couple of housekeeping things we need to discuss. If you hover, take your cursor and hover down towards the bottom of your screen, your toolbar will pop up, and you'll see the chat feature there. If, as we go through our session today, if you have any questions or comments for our presenter, just put them in the chat, and we'll get to them, maybe in the middle or towards the end. So if you wouldn't mind, just to make sure that you can hear us and you can see us well, if you wouldn't mind, just put your name in the chat and say hello and tell us where you're joining from. It's always kind of cool to see where we get people joining from. We've had people from all over the world in the country, so I really enjoy saying hello to folks from everywhere. So if you wouldn't mind, just say hello. Hey, Nicole and Ashley. Ashley from Louisville. Let's see. Yep, got a lot of Louisville folks today. New Orleans. All right. Welcome. Louisiana. Excellent. Yeah, so we're getting a bunch of folks in. Lexington. Hey, Miranda. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Again, I'm Dave Etkin. I'm the director here of the Louisville Small Business Development Center. We're one of 13 centers across the state of Kentucky, and the SBDC is a national program. There's SBDCs in every state. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat for our presenter today, and we'll get to them.
Dave. Yes. Sorry, your sound is just a little crackly or something.
Okay.
Is what I'm getting.
All right. How's that? Is that any better?
No, sound worse.
Oh, gosh. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, how's that?
Much better. Thank you.
I'm not sure what was going on there. So anyway, yeah. I'm glad to see everybody here today. If you haven't, again, just to reiterate, questions, put them in the chat. Just hover over the bottom of your chat feature will pop up and put it in there. So we have a great guest today, my good friend Raphael Collazo. He is a commercial real estate broker here in Louisville, Kentucky. And we work with tons of entrepreneurs and business owners, and one of the big topics that we work with and get questions from business owners is about how do I buy a piece of property to add to my business, or maybe I'm renting space and I like to purchase the building I am. And I think that there's no better way to create wealth and build generational wealth than owning real estate. And so Raphael was nice enough to agree to come back and talk to us about how, as a business owner, you can jump in and look at some options to buy the space that you're in, or maybe just look for some other real estate options for your business. So Raphael, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, definitely. Thanks again for hosting me, David. Loved the fact we were able to do this related to leasing several weeks ago, and I'm just glad to be back with you all today to learn a little bit more about the purchasing of commercial real estate. So,
yeah. So with that being said, I'm just going to hand it over to you if you want to share your screen.
Sure. I'm working on trying to get let's see, my presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Can you all see that?
It's coming up. There we go. Looking good.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. So first off, thank you all so much for hosting me today. I'm excited to be with you all to talk about a topic that I think, like David said, is extremely important, and it's pertaining to purchasing owner-occupied commercial real estate as a business owner. So to start off, I just want to give you a background at who I am. So I'm a former engineer, studied engineering in college and got into the software space. I was a software consultant for about 5 years before jumping into the brokerage space. And since 2019, when I started in the commercial real estate space, I've been operating, helping business owners and investors buy, sell, and lease commercial property in the retail side, office, multifamily, industrial sectors of commercial real estate. I'm also the author of 6 books, 4 of which were personal and professional development books. And the most recent 2 books that I've written are on the subject of commercial real estate. The first one called Before You Sign That Lease, The Small Business Owner's Guide to Leasing Commercial Space. And the most recent book, which I will be releasing here shortly, is called Before You Buy That Building, The Small Business Owner's Guide to Buying Commercial Real Estate, which kind of highlights the topic of how do you buy commercial real estate as a business owner. So, that's just some context on who I am. I know David had asked where you all are tuning in from. I'd love to also hear maybe what you guys do as far as your business is concerned and how long you've been in business, which helps provide context to the presentation that I'll be giving. So I'll give, let's say 30 to 60 seconds maybe to share that in the chat box. I think that'd be awesome. I see a few gentlemen's cut. That's awesome. Let's see, Skips Defense Solutions. Okay, so we got several people tuning in from all over, and it looks like I can see a few of the businesses that you guys do as well. So perfect. All right. Well, I will go ahead and move on, and we'll talk a little bit more. The print company, you own a gym. Gentleman's Cut, got several locations, 5 years in firearms, mostly defense contracting. That's awesome. Awesome. Great. Awesome. So it's good to hear some context from people who are watching the presentation so that I can make sure that the presentation is tailored towards what you guys are currently doing as well. So to start off, I like to, before I start working with someone, I typically like to sit down with them to get a feel for whether purchasing commercial property is right for them. Obviously, David had mentioned, I believe ownership of real estate in particular is a great generational wealth building tool, but it may not be something that is perfect for every single type of business. But that's why I like to sit down with them to go over the pros and cons of ownership of commercial real estate. So as far as the pros is concerned, I think the number one pro that a lot of business owners talk about is the control piece. So in a situation where you're leasing commercial property, you typically sign a 3 to 5 year lease. You may have some options on the back end so that you can control the property for that period of time. But after your lease is term is up, or the option extensions are terminated, the landlord has the control of the property, so they can choose to either jack up the rents or break up the space in half and lease that space to someone else, or just kick you out entirely. And so that control piece is a big reason why a lot of people like to own property, because now they kind of control their own destiny. Number 2 is, as David mentioned, it's equity buildup. So typically when you buy a piece of commercial property, you'll take out a loan to subsidize whatever you're going to be as far as the purchase price is concerned. So you may come to the table with $200,000 if it's $1 million building, and then the bank will loan you the remainder. Well, over the course of your ownership, you will be paying down interest on the loan, but also part of that applies to principal. And so over a period of time, you will start to own more of the real estate through just the natural process of just paying down the note. Along with that, there's appreciation. So as long as there's population growth in an area, and there is economic drivers that support it, you could experience some appreciation as well. And 2 to 3% appreciation year over year over a period of time can add up to significant returns if you in fact hold on to the real estate for a period of time. So those are the big pros as to why owning commercial real estate is of value. There are also some cons that need to be taken into consideration from business owners to make sure that it is in fact right for them. The biggest one is the initial investment. So if you're looking to see commercial financing, a lot of times you're looking anywhere between 10 to maybe 30% down payment. So if you're talking about $1 million note, you need to come to the table with anywhere between $100,000 to sometimes $300,000 or $350,000. I mean, that's a big chunk of change. And depending on what type of business you own, it may or may not be something you want to do. Along with that, there's ongoing expenses. And a lot of business owners may be in situations where they're triple net leases, where they're having to incur a lot of the ongoing expenses themselves. But in a situation where you're only responsible for paying for electric and water and just basic, internet or whatever else, by owning the piece of real estate. Now, if the roof has damage, you got to fix it. If the furnace is out, that's your responsibility. So that's something that needs to be considered prior to pulling the trigger on purchasing a commercial property, because if you don't factor that in to your analysis when you do purchase it, it's going to be kind of a rude awakening, once you take ownership and these things start to occur. And then finally is lack of flexibility. This may or may not be a con depending on what type of business you operate in. Some people get to a certain size, and that's kind of the size that they operate at for the duration of their business ownership. But if you're, in a business where you're rapidly expanding, maybe a 10,000 square foot space is perfect for you when you buy the building outright, or you buy the building to start. But then maybe 5 years later, when your staff has doubled, the 10,000 square foot space no longer works. In which case, you have to either sell the building and then use those funds to buy another building, or, maybe move out of that building, buy another building, and then you can consider maybe leasing up that space. But there's just, again, additional things you need to consider if you are in fact, going to be expanding significantly, and that space no longer becomes valid for your use. And so those are some of the things that you should consider prior to purchasing a commercial property. Now, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to talk a little bit about building your team. So anytime you're starting any type of process, I like to sit down and think, okay, who do I need to get involved in the process to make sure that I can reach my goals and reach the finish line without any bruises or scuffs. So really, as part of the team that you need to build, I think one of the first people you need to reach out to is a commercial real estate agent. And a lot of times I get, I have conversations with people who are like, well, you're a commercial agent, so it's not really, your opinion is not necessarily you're just biased with what you say this. But in reality, I truly believe that involving someone who is an expert on the market and understands the dynamics which in the market that you operate in is very important. Because if someone does this on a day-to-day basis, they're going to be able to help you understand what's out there, what's some of the terms and other things that are involved with the purchase process that you need to consider, and they're going to be able to get you where you need to go. So first off, I would definitely look at commercial agents, especially those that are working with buyers primarily. Commercial agents tend to specialize in tenant rep, or they specialize in the sales side of real estate. So really working with someone who has a lot of experience representing buyers on the acquisition of real estate is very helpful. Along with that, involving a commercial attorney, for at minimum, being able to review purchase contracts and other legal documents that may require a lawyer to be able to review. But also in a situation where, God forbid, something happens and litigation needs to occur, I mean, having someone that you can lean on in that situation is also a value. So, typically what I would recommend you do is, once you do get involved with a commercial real estate agent, ask for recommendations of commercial real estate attorneys and also commercial lenders. This is something that, is a little bit different than residential real estate, because, in residential real estate, if you're going to be purchasing a home for your just to live there, the financing is pretty cookie cutter. But in situations of commercial lending, it is very, very different. Different commercial lenders have different appetites for different types of businesses. And so, that's why I encourage my clients all the time to talk to a variety of different commercial lenders to get a feel for what's out there as far as terms are concerned. And then obviously David and his group does a phenomenal job with a small business development center. And I'm sure they could put you in contact with a lot of commercial lenders that, are able to help you along the path as well. So as far as lending options is concerned, once I sit down with a client and then I go through the process of explaining to them what the steps are, I typically put them in contact with a variety of different lenders to try to get a feel for what they can qualify for. This will kind of help the commercial real estate agent be able to narrow down the scope of properties to ones that fit in line with what your budget is. And so to start out, as far as lending options are concerned, there's two types of, financing that we will cover. There's a variety of different ways to finance commercial real estate, but the most common is probably traditional financing and SBA financing. As far as traditional financing is concerned, I'm not a banker, so I want to make sure that you understand that, these obviously are metrics that I'm just seeing in the marketplace as a commercial agent. But if you really want to get a feel for what exactly is out there, I would encourage you to talk to a commercial lender about this. But as far as things that I've seen in my career thus far, anywhere between 15 to 30% down payment is pretty typical in traditional financing. Along with that, 5 to 10 year terms. What terms means is how long the interest rate is fixed for. Unlike residential real estate residential financing where, you could have a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. A lot of times with commercial real estate, you're looking at 5 to 10 years fixed, and then it'll either float, meaning that the interest rate will just start to fluctuate based on whatever index that the bank is following, plus a margin for the bank to provide as far as profit's concerned, or a balloon payment occurs where, the note fully comes due, and that's just to force a refinance of the building. So those are typically what happens in those scenarios. As far as interest rates is concerned, I mean, it's fluctuating based on, market dynamics. You probably have heard in the news that the Fed has been, trying to press interest rates up to kind of control inflation. So interest rates today are much different than they were just 6 months ago. As far as a range is concerned, you're probably looking at between 5 and 7%. And that could very well change come July when the Fed meets again. And then in September, they're going to reevaluate as well. So, you can't hold me to that, but that's kind of what we're seeing right now in the marketplace. And then also different lending costs. You have origination fees, you may have point buybacks and stuff like that. And so what I typically tell my clients is that when you do start approaching lenders, ask them for some form of either fee sheet or to give you an explanation of what other fees are involved with bringing or being able to qualify for the loan. And so those are just some highlights that you can consider as far as traditional financing is concerned. As you look for SBA financing, there's two main products that the SBA offers. And just to give you some context on the SBA itself does not issue the loans. They actually guarantee a portion of the loans so from these lending institutions, thus making it a lot less risky for lenders to loan out to small businesses. And that's the whole function of a small business administration, is to help support small business. So the two products that they primarily offer are the 7A loan. The 7A loan you can utilize for a variety of different expenses, including working capital, equipment, real estate, construction, acquisitions of businesses, refinancing, et cetera. And then the 504 is, primarily focused for building acquisition and, construction and support of really the real property. So you're looking at existing buildings or land, new facilities, long-term equipment, modernization of streets and parking lots, landscaping, et cetera. So those are the two products typically offered by the SBA. As far as the pros and cons of SBA lending, again, David is the expert, and a lot of other people on this call may also be experts as well. So, don't quote me on all this as well. But, these are some of the things that I hear my clients say about why they decide to go with an SBA loan or not. So to start off, the primary pros are they do offer lower down payments. In particular, with the 504, you can get as low as, I believe, 10% down. So that's actually a big deal for a lot of business owners, because if you take, let's say, $1 million building that you want to purchase, a 10% down payment is $100,000 versus a traditional lender, which may require 20 to 25% down, which is $200,000 to $250,000. That's a big savings as far as coming to the table with less money. Along with that, I know the 504 loan has an upper limit, or the amortization period can be as long as 25 years. As opposed to a lot of other traditional lenders. Usually it's in the 15 to 20%, 20-year range as far as amortization is concerned. And what amortization means is that it's how long is the loan spread over. So the longer you spread the payments over, the lower the mortgage payment ultimately ends up being. So it just helps with, reducing that mortgage payment, even though the purchase price may be the same in both scenarios. And then finally, number 3 is funding other expenses. As we mentioned with the 7A, you could have financing for working capital. If you have a partner that you're working with that you want to buy them out, that's also something you can utilize as far as the 7A is concerned. So there's other ways for you to finance non-real property that can actually be of value to you if you are in fact looking to do so. As far as the cons are concerned, the big one that people talk about is the SBA fee. Especially what it is that's a fee charged by the SBA to keep the programs going. From my understanding, it's anywhere between 2 to 4% of the loan amount. But again, it's part of the pros as well, which are the lower down payment and amortization period. It's kind of a balance. Along with that, the slower process, and this is why I always recommend people work with SBA preferred lenders, because if you're not an SBA preferred lender and you go to seek SBA financing, the bank has to perform their underwriting, and then they have to send all the documents and applications and everything to the SBA, and then they have to perform their own independent financing as well. If you're an SBA preferred lender, the lender themselves can perform the underwriting, and the SBA can sign off on it. So it helps kind of shrink that timeline a little bit. But in a situation where, you're not dealing with an SBA preferred lender, it could take, instead of 60 days, which is maybe the traditional timeline to close, it may take you 90, 120, if not more, depending on, what delays occur. And then finally, number 3, which is something that, is probably going to also be something you have to deal with on the traditional side, or traditional financing side, I should say, is the personal guarantee. So most of the time they're going to require you to personally guarantee the note. So if for some reason, the financing, if they have to foreclose for some reason because you're not able to, perform on the note, they can come after your personal assets. So those are some of the pros and cons of SBA lending. So now that we've gone over, so first off, I just want to make sure if we pause right there, I know that was a lot of information. I know, feel free to type away in the chat box if you had any other questions pertaining to that. Again, I'm not an expert on financing or both traditional or SBA, but again, this is just more of my, experience thus far in my career, just working with lenders and clients on a day-to-day basis. So, all right. So as far as the next steps of the process is concerned, so once you've had an idea, talk to a few lenders, and they give you an idea of what you could potentially qualify for, that's when, I start defining the criteria with my clients. And typically what 4 characteristics I look for are, what's your budget, size, location, and timeline. So we're going to go through each briefly just so you guys can get a feel for what I mean. So as far as budget is concerned, obviously the upper limit purchase price is the main factor. But as far as the 2 variables that affect business owners the most is their initial cash outflow, which is the down payment, and then their monthly mortgage payment amount, because that's something that's going to be recurring as far as an outflow is concerned. So those 2 items are something that you're going to want to work with your lender on to get comfortable with. So, you want to make sure that the down payment amount is a comfortable amount for you. And then also that the monthly mortgage payment is something you can live with on a day-to-day basis. And just because you can qualify for $1 million, for example, as a purchase price, maybe you don't have to necessarily buy a building that's worth $1 million. Maybe buying a building that's $800,000 where you come to the table with 80 grand and now your mortgage payment is, let's say, $3,000 a month is more comfortable for you. That's probably where you should operate. And so that's why it's important to kind of work hand in hand with your lender to get a feel for what, those numbers are going to be on a day-to-day basis. Number 2 is the size, so, whatever business you're in, if you're a grocery store, you may require more square footage than, an office user that has 4 employees. So really getting a feel for what exactly you need as far as space requirements is concerned is important. Along with that, any unique characteristics of the space. For example, if you're a logistics company that requires you get semi trucks that come to your facility on a day-to-day basis, you're probably going to need dock doors. If you have, vehicles that you want to store on site, maybe drive-in bays are important. If you're a restaurant, you're going to want to be close to, visible roadways, high traffic counts, easy access to the facility, etc. So those are some of the considerations that you need to look for. As far as location is concerned, obviously, that's going to be very dependent on your use. If you operate in the industrial space on the logistics end, being close to your primary vendors is probably a value to you. You may want to be close to major roadways, or, if you ship a lot of product via the air, then maybe being close to the airport, being close to railways. And if you ship a lot of product on barges, you may want to be close to the river. Again, these are just conversations you want to have with your commercial agent to get a feel for what exactly your goals are. And then again, demographics are quite important as well. You wouldn't want to necessarily put a luxury goods store in an area where the demographics are more medium to low income. Just you wouldn't be able to make the amount of money that you would need to in order to support your business function. So again, a lot of this just comes down to sitting down with your agent and looking at the data. A lot of commercial agents have access to things like Site to Do Business, where they can pull, demographic data, they can pull traffic count data, they can pull a variety of different, metrics that could help make your decision a lot more easy. And then finally, as far as timeline's concerned, this is something I always have to kind of set expectations with my clients on, because I've had many people that contact me when their lease is about to expire. So it's like, okay, well, my lease is up in a month and I need to find a space and I need to be in it by the end of next month. It's like, okay, the timeline to purchase a commercial property is going to take you probably at minimum 45 days, but more realistically, more like 60 to potentially 90 days. And that's once you get under contract. That doesn't include the process and time to be able to find the property and make sure that it fits your use. And so what I often encourage people to do is, at least 6 months before your lease is expired, this is when you should start thinking about options out there and start reaching out to people about and then sharing your intent to potentially want to purchase a property. And so, that's something that I often have to, set expectations for on the front end. All right. So in a situation where you've defined your criteria and you start going through the process of identifying property, at some point you will find a property that you find to be in line with what you want. And again, there's no such thing as a perfect property, but obviously there are situations where you're able to find a property that checks the majority of your boxes, and you want to start moving forward with making an offer on that property. So to start out, what I typically do is I try to perform a market and property analysis on the subject property. So essentially what you would do is you would look at the comparables, or how many properties have sold in the area that are similar to this one, and then get a feel for what the price per square foot of the subject property is. And so, agents can go back about a year, maybe more, depending on how remote the area is. And then they'll pull these comps and try to give you a feel for what a range would be as far as price per square foot is concerned, based on, the size of the property, the condition, the location, et cetera. So once you have that data to reference, then you determine what appropriate offer price is, and you make the offer. As far as the contingencies within an offer, this is what I usually advocate clients do, is that they have contingencies, which are financing. So you want to be able to make sure that, if you go under contract and you cannot secure the proper financing, you can back out of the contract without forfeiting your earnest money deposit, which is an amount that you usually put up in an escrow account it's a good faith deposit. So you say, okay, I'm moving forward in good faith, but if I can't meet these contingencies, or these contingencies are not satisfied, then I get that good faith deposit back. And I don't have to worry about, losing that money to the seller. So there's a financing contingency, which allows you to back out of the contract if you cannot secure the appropriate financing. Having an inspection contingency, so that allows you to go into the building, inspect it, and make sure that it's actually functional for what you're trying to do. And if there's any issues that occur, with maybe the roof or HVAC or whatever else, you have the opportunity to potentially either request repairs or back out of the contract. And then number 3, which is extremely important, in particular when you're talking about industrial properties, or, properties where there used to be uses there that could present an environmental concern, is an environmental assessment. And a lot of lenders will actually require you to do at least a phase 1 environmental assessment, but having that contingency in place is also extremely important. And there's other types of contingencies that you may want to consider putting in there, but those are the 3 main ones that I often encourage my clients to pursue. And then finally, once you submit the offer and you provide whatever contingencies you have within the contract, there's usually going to be a back and forth. Sometimes the seller is going to say, yeah, I accept your terms as is, but there usually is going to be a back and forth. And this is where the being willing to compromise is very important. I've had a lot of scenarios where I've worked with clients that dig their heels in the ground. They say, I'm not going to negotiate one bit. And then oftentimes the deal falls apart, and then both parties are upset with one another. What I usually try to do as far as setting expectations with my clients is concerned is I try to showcase what the opportunity cost of not closing on a property is, because oftentimes people don't consider that. I've worked with clients in the past that we've made offers on properties, and then it just didn't go through, and then they didn't find a building for over a year. Like, what is that issue? I mean, what issue could that present to your business if you don't secure that space for an entire year? And maybe it doesn't present a significant amount of issues, but there are scenarios whereby that may present a lot of issues. And so considering that as you're going through the process of making offers is also very important to do, because I feel like a lot of people do not do that, and it kind of bites them at the end. So once you decide to make an offer and it's accepted and you're moving forward, you will have a contingency timeline, anywhere, oftentimes try to set it between 30 to 60 days to satisfy all the contingencies that you specified within the contract. And this oftentimes represents due diligence. So what I usually recommend as we go through the process of performing due diligence is you get a commercial property inspector to come on site, or you hire each a tradesperson that specializes in each of the components of the property to perform their inspection. So that means maybe having a commercial roofer come by to look at the roof, maybe have an HVAC tech come by and check out the furnaces and everything else. Maybe have, electrician, if the panel looks like it's off or anything like that, have electrician come by and look to see that you have the proper, capacity for, whatever your use is going to be. So those types of individuals come by to be able to make sure that it's actually going to be functional for your use. Along with that, I encourage people to review bills and other documents that may be pertinent to the transaction. You want to make sure you understand what your monthly electric bill is going to be, if maybe a water and water use, especially if the property was used for a similar use in the past. That could give you a pretty good idea of what your ongoing expenses are going to be on that front. Next up is the environmental assessment. As I mentioned, a lot of times the bank will order that themselves, but again, this is something that needs to be considered, because if you go through the initial environmental assessment and potential issues could have arisen, now you have to go to what's known as a phase 2, which could get very, very expensive, in which case that becomes typically a negotiation item between the buyer and the seller. And if it showcases that there may be significant environmental damage or issues, then that also gives you the right to be able to back out if need be. And then finally, what I typically recommend is getting a survey. I can't tell you how many times I've had clients say that they don't want to get a survey because they don't want to have to pay the additional, whatever, $800 or $1,000, whatever it costs to get a survey. And then, issues may arise down the road. Luckily I haven't had any clients that haven't had any issues, but several agents in our office have had situations where they performed a survey and they realized that there was either an encroachment, like, there was either a fence that went on their property line, which needed to be remedied. Or in one case, one of our agents was representing someone who was buying a parcel of land that ended up, they thought was like 50 acres or something like that. And when they performed the survey, they realized that the actual parcel was 35 acres. So imagine that's 15 acres difference on what they thought they were purchasing, in which case they took the survey to the seller and they were able to negotiate a lower purchase price as a result. But they would never have known that had they not performed the survey. So, this is something that I tell my clients all the time is it's worth getting a survey, even if you have to pay an additional expense, just for the peace of mind of knowing what you actually own. All right. So once you go through the process, and again, I want to make it clear as well, I'm not an attorney, so I want to make sure that you don't take any of this as legal advice. I wanted to also specify that at the beginning. All right. So finally, once you go through the due diligence process and, you provide all the financial documentation to the lender and they approve your loan, and you go through the process of, trying to get to the closing table, here are some pre-closing items that you need to consider, prior to getting to the actual closing table. First off is permits and licensing. As many of you guys who are you've been in business for quite some time, you already understand what licensing and permits you need. This is something that, you can go to the city and a lot of times they'll be able to tell you exactly what you need. But again, this is a checkbox that needs to be checked before closing. There may be some property or business insurance that you need to secure. Oftentimes, obviously property insurance, depending on what your lease is, it may have not been under your name, but now you'd have to get your own independent, property insurance account. And then also your business insurance would transfer over to the new property as well. And then finally, as you receive the closing statement from the lender several days before, you want to carefully review each item to make sure that everything is being calculated correctly. I can't tell you how many times I've reviewed closing statements and there have been errors, whether that's, they didn't do the prorations right as far as taxes were concerned, or they added a fee that shouldn't have been there, or they allocated a fee that should have been attributable to the seller, to the buyer. Again, these types of things happen pretty regularly. So you just want to make sure that you carefully review your closing statement so that everything is actually where it needs to be. And then finally, I always recommend doing a final walkthrough of the property, especially if you submitted a repair request or something along those lines. You want to make sure that anything that number one, the property is as good, if not better condition than when you performed your inspection before you take possession of the property, because it's going to be a lot harder for you to seek remedy after you close. It's better to get it done ahead of time to make sure that things are as they should be prior to you closing on the property. All right. So now, this is obviously a summary of everything. And once you get to the closing table, you sign on the dotted line, you have finally now purchased your commercial property, and it is time to celebrate. And hopefully this gives you the opportunity to continue with your business and continue to grow. And like David said early on, build that generational wealth that everyone is seeking. So, all right. That was a quick presentation. I hope, you gained some value from it. David, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Not to add, but we do have a couple questions.
Sure.
Caitlin asks, like in your transactions, are you seeing any 50% or 15% down payments as opposed to the 20 to 30%?
Yeah, it depends on the lender, and that's why I encourage people to talk to as many lenders as possible. And also, it not only does it depend on the lender, it also depends on the financial standing of the borrower as well. So, again, there's a lot of variables, but I have seen 15% in the past. I've also seen certain loan programs for different types of professions. I know there's physician loans out there that can go as low as no down payment whatsoever, which is pretty surprising to me. But that is something that's out there. So again, talk to as many lenders as you can. There's a lot locally. And I would even encourage you to talk more so to, small banks like regional banks or local banks, as a lot of them do have programs that may be, more attractive to small business owners.
Yeah, that going back to the SBA has that 504 loan program, which is a 10% down payment, but it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time, so your seller has to be a bit patient with you. So I would look into that. It's always an option.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I was referencing more so on the traditional financing side, but you're 100% right on the 504 side. You can get as low as 10%.
Yeah. I guess I should say this because I'll get the question, but on the 504, you cannot use that for investment real estate. Whatever you buy has to be owned or occupied 51% from an operating business, not a passive business. So, a couple of things to keep in mind on that.
Absolutely.
Ashley asks, what I know you kind of answered this a little bit, maybe you can speak a little bit more to it, but the lending process, how long does it take normally? What do you think?
That's a great question. The underwriting side is usually pretty quick. The things that are holding up, financing right now is the appraisal. And, the big problem is that for some reason, there's just not as many commercial appraisers out there, and at least here in Louisville. And so, what usually, would take the bank 2 to 3 weeks to underwrite, it may take them, 6 weeks total to get you the final determination, because the appraisals are taking 5-6 weeks. So, the bank can do everything they can on the front end to vet you as a potential lender, a borrower, and then also they have the purchase contract in place to see what the purchase price amount would be, but they won't issue the funds until the appraisal comes back and they're able to determine that it is in fact, of value. So that's the thing that's holding a lot of lenders up right now. So, 5 to 6 weeks is what a lot of lenders are telling me, but maybe that changes in the future, but that's kind of where, where I'm getting. So really 45 days is probably a good, contingency timeline for financing. And that's kind of what I always recommend.
Yeah. So here's my question. So what are you seeing as far as demand for certain properties like? I mean, is there like a short supply of industrial or and a big supply of retail? I mean, I'm just throwing it out there, but what would you say to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, industrial, still very, it's kind of like the darling property right now, especially interestingly enough, the over 10,000 square feet, is just really hard to come by. I mean, if you're looking in the 10 to 25,000 square foot range, I mean, it's hard to find. It's very, very difficult to find. You'll start seeing a little bit of inventory, and not a whole lot, but a little bit of inventory above that amount, up to maybe 100,000 or 150,000 square feet. And then after that, there's not as much available. And I think, I guess it's, smaller businesses typically operate within that, 5, 10 to 25,000 square foot range. And then obviously the larger corporate entities operate in the, over 200,000 square foot range. So sometimes you'll see a little bit more inventory in that, 50 to 150 square foot range, or 150,000 square foot range. As far as retail is concerned, it really just depends on the type of retail, where it's located. I will say this, that restaurants are really hard to come by, especially second generation restaurants. I have several clients that I'm looking for on the lease side, and obviously on the purchase side, that it seems to be the same way. It's just building out a restaurant is so expensive that a lot of people are just electing to go with, a second generation concept, meaning that it's already built out as a restaurant. It was used as a restaurant in the past, and they just would rather either lease it or potentially buy it themselves, just because they don't want to have to deal with the hundreds of thousands of dollars they'd have to spend on a build out. So, right. That's kind of what I'm seeing on my end. Office is pretty surprisingly actually performing pretty well, especially on the East End. If you're talking, 1,000 square foot to 2,000 square feet, like the condos, office condos are they're selling really, really quickly, but which is somewhat counterintuitive when you consider COVID. But it seems like a lot of people are figuring, hey, I don't want to be at home anymore, or maybe they just want to have a separate location they can go to operate out of. Then, that seems to be what's happening right now.
Yeah. Chayton asked, where do you find an agency to find the best use for a property? Is there a company that goes out and performs this service?
Best use for a property. I mean, not necessarily. I mean, you could just ask, a lot of, if commercial agents can give you an idea of what, people are looking for. And, depending on what the zoning of the property is, depending on its configuration, depending on how much you're willing to invest in the property, you may be able to, change it around to maybe attract a particular user. I think really what highest and best use you should look for is, what is it currently zoned for? So what type of tenants can you potentially attract? And then number two is, what are those potential tenants looking for? And then what are the market rates for those particular uses? And then based on what the market rates is, you can potentially see, okay, am I willing to invest whatever it's going to cost to get it in a condition that is going to attract those types of users? So, it's a multivariate analysis that requires just data to be put in front of you. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question, but I would imagine that, most an experienced commercial agent would be able to kind of tell you, hey, this is what we're seeing in the marketplace. And that'll at least give you some context.
Yeah. I've actually had that done. I've been not, I guess it was semi unintentional, but when you're going through a process, maybe you can talk a little bit about this too, Raphael, but like there's a process called a broker's opinion of value. It's not so much of a appraisal, but that's your broker's giving you just what he thinks, and he may say, well, yeah, it's a retail place here now, but if you turn it into multifamily, it'd be worth 10 times more. So that's probably be a good use of that.
Absolutely.
Do you do that kind of service too, Raphael?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I do that pretty regularly. I've had people just contact me, and I'm happy to do it. Even if it doesn't necessarily even turn into anything for me, it's more of just trying to educate the populace. And that's my goal, is to try to just become an expert, the go-to expert for people. So, if someone has any questions in particular about, what, maybe the highest and best use for a space could be and what it could potentially go for. I mean, that's something that I do pretty regularly. So.
Mhm. Yeah. Chris asks, Raphael, what is your typical role in this whole process for a buyer?
For a buyer? Yeah, that's a great question. So, I'm kind of the quarterback. So really what comes down to is, I would start working with a buyer, and kind of explain the process ahead. And then from there, I would put them in contact with the appropriate parties and make sure that all the check boxes are checked to be able to get us to the finish line. So, I'm in communication with the lender. I'm in communication with, the inspector. I'm in communication with, the appropriate tradespeople, depending on whether or not we're utilizing them for the inspection. And yeah, just anything that needs to be done to make sure that you get to the finish line. That's kind of my role in the transaction. And, on the buyer side, since the transaction, the commissions for the transaction are actually paid by the listing broker. So it's a free for buyers. They don't pay for the services. So.
Ralph asks, would using the property for a dwelling as well as a business address be allowed or frowned upon?
Well, that's, I'll tell you a context that I'm working on, one deal I'm working on right now for a business owner client. They're going to try to operate their business on the bottom floor, and they'll occupy 51% of the space. And then upstairs, they're going to try to do some Airbnbs. And we're working with a lender in town that said essentially, as long as you occupy 51% of the space, they can, provide this particular loan program to my clients. Again, you would probably be able to educate, them more on the SBA side, but I don't know if I would imagine it would be hard for you to maybe seek, residential financing, but on the commercial end, it may be different. So.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Back, I don't know, 70, 80 years ago, that was the norm. I think, people lived above their business, especially if they're a small business owner. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's still somewhat prevalent in larger cities. You may own a convenience store and you live in the apartment in the back, or,
Right.
So, it's not uncommon.
Yeah. That here in Louisville, that Houck store on Goss Avenue. Are you familiar with that, Raphael?
Yeah.
The Houcks all lived in the back of that little grocery store for generations. Yeah, that was really
That's
cool.
awesome.
Yeah. Ashley asked, any projections on the supply and demand given recent changes in the economy and surge in people leaving the workforce, interest rates, that sort of thing? What are you thinking?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. I think it all just depends, right? I mean, I wish I could, just say yes or no definitively, but you would think that, and this is I actually have a YouTube channel where I talk about a variety of different topics, and one being right now, which I'm tracking carefully, is the Fed is kind of in a delicate balancing act where they're trying to raise interest rates to stem inflation because the consumer price index, if you've been tracking it over the last year, I mean, we've been, in the 7-8% range as far as year over year increases in inflation. So obviously that's not sustainable long term. And so the solution for that, or one of the levers that the Fed can pull, is to try to push or pressure banks to raise interest rates by modifying their target rate for the federal funds rate. But the issue is that we also have supply constraints in a variety of different for different raw materials, one being oil. I know we're not able to refine as much as we need to domestically, and that's causing issues as far as pricing for oil is concerned. And since oil is an input on all these different products, I mean, you may run into a situation where the Fed, pulls a lever to try to raise interest rates. The economy begins to cool, and then prices continue to increase regardless. So you're in a GDP is dropping while inflation is increasing, creating a stagflationary environment. So obviously that is not a good situation. And obviously that's what the Fed is trying to control. As far as the, supply and demand is concerned for real estate, I think what it really comes down to is, how do people respond now that the economy is starting to slow? I know there's a lot of people that are hesitant about what the stock market is doing. And so real estate tends to be somewhat of an inflation hedge. It's a pretty decent inflation hedge. And so I'm foreseeing that, you'll probably see a lot more money coming into the real estate side of things. However, because interest rates are higher, the cost of capital is higher. So, what does that mean for return metrics? So it's one of those things where theoretically, if you raise interest rates, you should see a price drop off and, demand begin to slow. Thus, supply increases and pricing drops. But, in a scenario where more money's flooding in because, the stock market is too volatile, then how does that affect the equation? So it's not a simple solution, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Yep. There's no crystal balls.
Yeah. But it will be, we'll know more as time progresses. And that's kind of what we do, right? You just look at the market and see how it all works. See
That's
it all
right.
plays out.
Yeah. Looks like that's all the questions we have. So Raphael, this has been great. You're a great speaker. And I think that folks out there will be reaching out to you here real soon if everybody's kind of interested in buying some real estate for the business. So
Yeah.
Raphael,
Yeah. And I'll even share. So I know I mentioned that, I finished a book. So if you guys want a free, digital copy of the book, you can access it here. Obviously make available to you guys if you'd like. It's just this presentation, but a lot more elaborate. It's about 150 pages. So hopefully you gain some value from it.
I don't know where you found the time to do all that, but it's pretty impressive.
Thanks. No, I appreciate it. I just, I follow this guideline of the compound effect by Darren Hardy. It's this book that I read a while ago that kind of put me on, all these different things. And it's, small, consistent, positive action on every day add up to massive results. So, I get to a point now where I'm writing 250 to 500 words a day. And so if you do the math, 200-page book is 50,000 words. It takes you about 100 days to write a 200-page book. So that's kind of my logic.
Easy enough. Sounds easy, but probably not. So
Yeah.
Raphael, thank you so much. And thank everybody for joining us today. And we'll reach out to Raphael. There's his contact info. We'll send you the slides later on, and you'll have his contact information. You'll have the bit.ly link there. You can click on that and take advantage of that. So thanks again, Raphael. We'll have you back again. I know we will.
I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you.
All right. Have a good Tuesday, everybody. We'll see you soon.